Hey, what's up everybody? Today we are doing TikToks about anxiety because how else are you going to learn about mental health if you aren't on TikTok? This seems to be a primary source for information for a lot of people struggling with mental health. I do want to say that there are some good things out there, but there's also a lot of misinformation that people put out there. And a lot of times it is anecdotal information. Somebody has a certain experience with one particular diagnosis, and then it gets presented as general information. This is this way for all people with this particular diagnosis. So today we are focusing specifically on anxiety. We're going to dig through a couple of TikToks that I came up with. My algorithm on TikTok is not particularly curated, and so it was just through a search of anxiety TikToks, and this is what we came up with. So please give a like and subscribe, and let's dive into it.
I have anxiety. Don't ever say that again. Don't ever say that again. Regardless of if somebody's giving you a diagnosis, and I've been diagnosed plenty of times, and I've been medicated plenty of times.
I think I know where she's going with this, and I've talked about this on the channel before, about that ownership of a diagnosis and it becomes part of you. Let's see how she develops this idea.
But don't ever say again, I have anxiety, because then it becomes your identity.
Or would you also say, don't say my anxiety?
Yes.
My, because that.
Yes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. What you want to say is, I feel anxious about.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good reframe of the I have anxiety or my anxiety talk. To say I feel anxious about, because that grounds you in the present moment. I am currently feeling anxious about, and then you have a specific target about it. And so that makes it a lot more specific rather than a general mood or way of being for our lives. So I think that's really helpful. That's a great way to start in terms of just talking about anxiety. And let's see what else she has to say about that.
Because now you're labeling the feeling and you're identifying the thing. Because what anxiety actually is it's a crisis in your belief in self. Any moment of uncertainty in your life, whether you are applying for a job or you're, asking somebody out, or you're starting a podcast, or you're opening up bills and you're worried about any moment of uncertainty, you're going to feel that alarm.
I think that's a helpful description. I do hope that she circles back to the initial thought that she had, but saying that, yes, anxiety is a normal part of life and it's built into certain experiences. For the way that I explain to clients, it's based in fear. There's some uncertainty that she talked about, and there's some lack of knowing when we like to feel very confident and very capable. And so anxiety will normally creep in when there is something that we are unsure about. That doesn't mean it is at a clinical level all the time when we experience that, and that's a very helpful distinction to be able to make, that there is normal anxiety throughout the course of life, and then there's also a clinical level of anxiety that a counselor might be able to help with.
Because your body's trying to get you to pay attention, to do something. That's the purpose of it. But when you say, I feel anxious about, now what we can address is the real issue, which is you doubt your capability to face it. And you can always face anything in your life through what you choose to think about and what you do or don't do next. That is where your power is.
Wow. So I would say that people are not all universally built to handle whatever circumstances are thrown their way. I think this is a very Western, like we're upper middle class, we're well off kind of approach to dealing with anxiety because we have the resources. We generally have the support and access to professionals and loved ones who will be able to support us through this and help us through a situation, which is where we normally see a lot of that anxiety becoming more of a clinical problem. But that logic, I think, doesn't hold up as well for people who don't have access to those same kinds of resources and capabilities. That's not a knock on them. I just think that's a bit of a blanket statement that's tailored towards a specific audience. I would also say that her ending point is really helpful, that yes, what we control is our response to things and what we're going to do next or not do next. And that's something that I do encourage my clients to focus on is, okay, yes, you're feeling this way. What do you want to do about that? And then that helps us shift from this kind of ruminating pattern of thinking over into action-oriented, solution-focused kind of thinking. And it's not to discredit or invalidate the emotions. It's let's process the emotion. We've identified, okay, I am feeling anxious about. Now, what am I going to do with it? So great start in terms of intro to anxiety through TikTok. Let's see what else other creators have to say about it.
Is probably one of the most lonely, most isolating things to have, because you are your own worst enemy and you live inside your head. And I know there are thousands of people out there who suffer just like me.
Okay, that's a short one. Very dramatic. I don't know if that's par for the course for TikTok, but I guess if you're trying to get views, then that makes sense. And this is not on this creator as a person, it's just that the music and the narration was like very dramatic. When she said it's one of the most isolating things out there, I can see that because I think especially with anxiety, but there are other mental illnesses that kind of move towards this trend also, where it feels like your problem's not big enough for someone to actually care about, or like you doubt that other people care about you or that you're worthy of that relationship. They're just tolerating you. And so if you actually came to them with a real need, then they would ditch you right away because they'd say like, oh, it's not worth the investment because I'm just here trying to be nice. And so yes, in that sense, I've had a lot of clients who struggle with reaching out for help, leaning on community, developing real friendships, because it's hard to be vulnerable when you're feeling that unworthy, when you're feeling that isolated already. I'm gonna revisit the last few seconds of that just to remind myself what she was saying towards the end.
It is probably one of the most lonely, most isolating things to have, because you are your own worst enemy and you live inside your head.
Okay, so I think that's talking about some of the self-doubt and the perceived lack of capability that the previous person was talking about, that you are constantly criticizing yourself, that I'm not good enough, I don't deserve this, someone's going to find me out, someone's judging me. And what a lot of my clients have found to have been really helpful is actually writing down what they're telling themselves. And there's something about how it sounds different when it's in your head. It sounds a lot more real. It sounds a lot more isolating and discouraging compared to when you write it out. And then a lot of my clients, when they do that, they're like, this is ridiculous. This doesn't make any sense. There's something about translating that to something external, either talking to someone and being really honest about this is where my thoughts are leading me right now, or writing it down and seeing it for yourself. That allows us to bring a more critical eye to that. When it's just stuck in our heads, it just feels a lot more real.
And I know there are thousands of people out there who suffer just like me.
We talked about this in a previous video. Anxiety is one of the most prevalent mental illnesses or diagnoses out there. And so one of the things I really do encourage people to think through is, it's almost like an opposite action kind of intervention is, if anxiety is wanting you to isolate yourself, to draw back because you don't feel like you're worthy, the way forward is to put yourself out there, be vulnerable. And it's super hard, and that's what I'm there for as a counselor, to be able to move us to that point where we're ready to take that kind of risky feeling step. But then it's really powerful when we're able to engage in that kind of vulnerability, because that's what renders all of the lies that anxiety tells us meaningless. When we have evidence, when we're able to put ourselves out there and see, people care about me, people love me, people accept me. That's really powerful. All right, these aren't too bad in terms of content so far. Again, I think like I would never be able to make dramatic shorts like this, but you know, that's just a personal preference, and that's probably why I'm not on TikTok. Okay, 5 habits that are actually anxiety. What do I think about that characterization? I guess the implication is that anxiety has a way of taking over your life, so that things that you believe are habitual and just ways that are unique to you, thinking in your personality, are actually the anxiety manifesting itself. I guess I could see that. I would definitely want any client who kind of thought that way to be able to make sure like they have a pretty solid understanding of who they are as a person, so that they can kind of have that separation between what is anxiety wanting me to do or encouraging me to think versus who I actually am, what my values are, what I actually care about. So that would be some deeper work too. But thinking everyone is judging you, that's a very common one. And it's probably exacerbated by being in a very online relationship kind of world, where a lot of things are evaluated based on how many likes you get, what kind of responses you get. And you know, like one of the worst things is to feel ignored, in that nobody's responding, nobody's engaging, nobody's commenting, which by the way, again, please do like and comment, that helps the channel to grow, right? But that's kind of the irony of it, is that we invest so much of our energy into curating this online social life, and then it leads to real world anxiety in terms of thinking that maybe our in-person relationships work the same way. And it opens us up to analyzing, overanalyzing, ruminating, and just fixating on what I think everyone else is thinking about me. So yeah, that's definitely something to look out for. Just because you think that way does not mean you have clinical anxiety. I want to be very clear about that in terms of just these pieces that we're about to see are probably not the clinical criteria for anxiety, but they could be ways that that manifests if you do have the condition. Oh, I don't like this one. We've talked about this in multiple videos. Eye contact is a very cultural thing. So I think TikTok seems to be so far geared towards a fairly Western audience, which is totally fair. Or again, that could just be what the algorithm's showing me, right? But yes, in a Western culture, lack of eye contact is perceived as lack of confidence. And if you're anxious, we would expect you to have a lower sense of self-esteem or confidence, which would naturally imply less eye contact or avoiding eye contact, either because you don't think you're worth someone making direct eye contact with you, or you don't feel enough to be able to engage in that way, which probably a sociologist would be able to describe that better. But I will say though, that's not universal across cultures, so I don't particularly like this as a general rule of, oh, if somebody's avoiding eye contact, then they have anxiety. Thinking you need to be perfect. Okay, again, this could be a chicken or egg kind of situation. There are definitely type A people out there who just want everything to be perfect, and whether it is that drive, whether it's their upbringing, or if you believe in birth order, or just some quirk of their personality, that can maybe lend itself to being more anxious when things aren't the way that you want them to be. Or is it that they have anxiety and so they tend to want things to be perfect? So I'm not quite sure about that. That would be something more research-based to be able to try to figure out. But I think it's fair to say that my clients who have been anxious would tend to want that perfectionism. But I think the difference, which might make it more of a clinical issue, is that that desire for perfection also leads to them avoiding the task because they can't see themselves being able to accomplish it perfectly to the standards that are set in their minds. And so you see the symptom of avoidance more so as a result of this perceived desire for perfectionism. And so what's really helpful in addressing that is to just say, what's this first step that I need to do? What is a process I need to go through? So we're focusing on the process of doing this task instead of the final product. I follow you and not able to sit still. Okay, so I suppose if someone has nervous energy, they might have difficulty sitting still. An inability to sit still could be indicative of so many different things. One, it could just be normal, right? We don't have to take any of these and say this is a clinical issue. Not being able to sit still is just how some people are. Then you're talking about other potential diagnoses that could encompass that. ADHD comes to mind. PTSD, if you're sketched out in a certain situation, then you would have difficulty sitting still. Autism spectrum disorder. Tourette's. I mean, there's so many different things. So just saying, oh, you're not able to sit still, you must be anxious. Again, incredibly vague, not particularly helpful. I think in the bigger picture of things, it could be one of those final pieces that says okay, maybe we want to look in this direction. But that by itself, I would hate for anyone to diagnose themselves with anxiety just based on, oh, I have trouble sitting still. To the park, through the jungle, through the dark. Saying I am sorry even if it's not your fault. Okay, I can get with this a little bit because of kind of the thought pattern that it betrays. Again, some of this could be rather cultural as well. Some people are just from families that are, if you want to call it rather apologetic. That doesn't have to be a clinical issue. I have had clients before though who recognize that they don't like that they apologize all the time, and it comes out because they feel that insecurity in themselves and they feel like they're shoring up the relationship and trying to cover up any potential offenses. And so again, it stems back to that sense of avoidance of I don't feel worthy of this relationship, and so the best I can do is try to protect it by avoiding any conflict, trying to make sure I can give absolutely no offense. So I'll apologize for anything under the sun. So again, rather vague. I think a lot of these feel rather anecdotal. So there might be somebody with anxiety who shows all of these things, but by themselves, that doesn't make them all symptoms that would help in diagnosing somebody with anxiety. So I hope you kind of get what I'm saying in that I am not saying that if you are anxious, you will not experience any of these things. I fully own that there might be some people who fit all of these and who have been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. That's totally possible. And I'll say there are probably many people who fit that criteria. But what I'll say is to take one person's experience and then generalize it to say, oh, these are exclusively signs of anxiety, or you can know you have anxiety if you do these things. I think that's less helpful. So I would say this is the one that I am the least on board with because it's presenting specific anecdotal information as more general rules. I think that's unhelpful. Random things you may experience every day because of anxiety. Okay, this looks like it might be in the same vein as the other one. I'm hoping it's a little more helpful though. And I was running for okay, stomach issues. Yes, this is true. There is a lot of emerging research and a lot of less new research that does talk about this brain-gut connection that I think was criminally under-discussed in grad school. And I do want to take more trainings to better understand the connection there. That there's a lot of research, a lot of books that I read that talk about how the gut is affected by our moods and vice versa, how our gut health can also affect our brain health. And so yes, stomach issues, IBS, things like that can definitely be impacted by anxiety. Whether it's caused by anxiety leading to poor gut health or gut health affecting poor mental health, I don't know the connection there, but there's something directional there. Pain throughout your body. Yeah, so in the sense of anxiety potentially triggering inflammatory responses in our body, which are designed to fight infection and danger, the sense that anxiety is sending these signals throughout the body that there is some kind of threat can very well lead to pains, aches, tightness, those kinds of things that are normally supposed to be an inflammatory response that helps to fight infections and things that our bodies can actually fight off. But when it's anxiety, there's nothing to attack within the body. And so those responses just kind of continue sometimes for years and years, and our bodies don't ever feel like they can be at rest. Yeah, difficulty sleeping at night, a very common one. One of the first things to go with a lot of mental health disorders is restful sleep. And so a lot of my clients will talk about that. So I don't think this is particularly unique to anxiety, but it is one of those things where a lot of people say they feel like their brains won't turn off at night. They're running through all of these different scenarios, either thinking about the past conversations that they had that day, interactions that they had, or what's going to go on the next day, things that they're worried about. So one article that I've read before talked about how our brains need time to process, and because we're on our phones, in front of computers, working, all of these things, we're taking in input so much throughout the day that our brains latch onto the first quiet moment that we have to process. And for a lot of us, that's when we're laying down to go to sleep. That's the first quiet moment that we have throughout the day. So what I've encouraged clients to do, and this is what the article suggested, take 10-15 minutes at intervals throughout the day. Maybe just start with one midday or something like that. Just sitting without your phone, without a book, without any extra input. You can close your eyes, or you can just have a quiet moment. Breathe through it, and allow your thoughts to kind of flow, because that's what our brain needs to be able to sort through some of the craziness that we go through in life and see how that might benefit your time sleeping at night. Nobody knows, nobody. There's still hope to live a productive life. Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a problem with any of these. Again, they can be specific, but I think it touches on some of the medical and mental health connections that's really emerging in research. So that's fascinating stuff if you have a chance to read about it. All right, this is our last video now. This is a little bit longer. This is anxiety relief techniques. So we've talked about a lot of the descriptions of anxiety, how you know you might have it. This is what you're supposed to do for it. So let's see how this goes.
Take your tongue and press it up to your back left molar. Yeah, just keep it right there for a second. Good, and now think of a country that begins with the letter A. Good, okay, now take your tongue and flip it over to your right molar.
Okay, I'm not super familiar with a lot of these body-based interventions. But first of all, her voice seems fairly calming. That helps. The music also helps. But the way that she's motioning and the way that she's saying left molar, right molar, I wonder if this is like a bilateral stimulation that comes very often in EMDR, which is a way to treat trauma, but can also be super helpful with anxiety. So that bilateral stimulation is supposed to be a way of helping us process our feelings and be able to sit with our feelings. I always say it sounds like magic to me, but this stuff works.
You're doing great. Teeth will separate just a bit. think of a fruit that begins with the letter B. Good. And now press your lips together, but separate your teeth just a little bit.
Okay, so this is interesting. I'm following along, even though it's not very visible that I'm following along. But when she's saying, close your lips, but separate your teeth a little bit, what's interesting is that that's, at least for me, and I think this is true for most people too, that's how our mouth actually is when we're at rest. So if you take a moment when you're not paying attention to your mouth like that, and you notice what's going on, you'll have your lips together, but your teeth will still be separate. And that's kind of how our mouth is when it's a little more relaxed. One thing that I do that might be kind of similar with this person who's doing this is that I'll encourage my clients after a mindful breathing session, or if we do a progressive muscle relaxation, I'll ask them to let their faces actually hang slack. So not even relaxed, but just going expressionless. You can try it sometime. It's different from our resting face. Even when we're in our normal expression, we're still activating muscles. So if we can allow those muscles to loosen, you'll end up with this kind of slack expression that helps us to relax and really allow the muscles in our face, which are emoting all the time, to be able to relax. Let's see what else she's got.
Good. And now with your free hand, can you place it on your cheek? Yeah, place your hand right on your cheek. You're doing good. Okay, and now think of an animal. You can take your hand down. Think of an animal that starts with the letter D. Very good. Okay, and now look into my eyes. We're gonna close our eyes in 3.
Okay, before she goes to that, there's something that I noticed that's very rhythmic about the way she's doing this. And then she's doing this little thing with her hand towards the bottom of the screen. I don't know if you're catching that when I do the screen record. And so that leads me to think more of that bilateral stimulation too, where you're also kind of following with your eyes side to side. Again, I don't know why that stuff works, but it does. So let's see what she suggests when our eyes are closed.
2, 1, close your eyes. Good. Now I want you with your mind's eye to imagine everything in the room that you're in right now. Try and landscape plot. Try and imagine where the items are. You're doing great. The furniture is, the color of the walls. Yeah, just imagine the room that you're in. Good. And now with your eyes closed in the room that you're in, I want you to make a facial expression, okay? A really exaggerated one. You could growl, you could smile, you could laugh, you could frown. You're doing great. Make it right now. Keep it there. Exaggerate it a little bit more, Good. Relax. Breathe in through your nose. Feel the temperature of the air.
Sorry, I gotta pause real quick. So if you were following along with that at home, this is actually really similar to what I do with progressive muscle relaxation. So when she's saying do some kind of expression, right? That was what I was talking about. When we emote with our faces, we are using the muscles in our faces to activate. And what that does is that leads to tension, even when we're doing something like smiling. And so in progressive muscle relaxation, what you do is you tense your muscles and then relax them. So I think that's very similar to what she was doing here, activating the muscles and then allowing them to relax. Sorry, I interrupted.
Air in your nose. Is it warm or is it cool? Breathe out of your nose. Notice if it's warm or if it's cool. Good. Okay, now we're gonna open our eyes in 3, 2, 1. Eyes are open. Hi. Now that we're all just a little bit more calm and settled down, how are you? How was your day, your week, your month? What were the letters and foods and fruits and animals you chose? Tell me anything.
Okay, that was an interesting one. I don't know what's up with the country, fruit, and animal thing. That I don't know. But she's incorporating what I think, again, not trained in EMDR, what I think is bilateral stimulation with a lot of the rhythmic movements and moving the tongue back and forth. I only got one hand on one cheek though, so I don't know if she matched it on the other side. But then towards the end, a lot of mindfulness work, feeling the air that you're breathing, what it feels like, what you're experiencing with your body in the moment. That's all very mindfulness based. So yes, a lot of very familiar techniques. When I do mindfulness sessions, I tend to pace it a little bit slower. So she was really going through stuff. So I don't know whether that's a function of her practice or whether that's just the format of TikTok that she needs to speed it up a little bit. I could see this being helpful for people, and I could see people having like a playlist either on TikTok or YouTube or whatever of just like different exercises that are scripted and that they can go through for like 3 minutes at a time and just be able to center themselves a little bit throughout the day. If things are getting really overwhelming or things are really spiking up internally, I could be able to pull this out and take a couple minutes at my office, in the bathroom, at home, whatever, take a few quiet moments and be able to go about my day. I see that being helpful. So those are the TikToks that we're going through today. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching them along with me. Please let me know what you think about people talking about anxiety and mental health on TikTok, as well as just what you think about what we heard in these different TikToks themselves. So look forward to your comments. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time.